Hello, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Work Plus Life podcast, where we talk about modern work and the forces driving change. My name is Yoli Chisholm, and I'm the CMO here at Venn. And welcome and thanks for tuning in. One of the forces driving huge change globally across companies, big and small, is the increase in cybersecurity incidents, including ransomware threats, largely driven by exploits of and vulnerabilities in critical business technologies that we use every day. Today, we're going to talk about the recent incident, aptly or not so aptly called the Printnightmare. But before we get into the show, we have three guests with us. I'll have them introduce themselves, starting with you, Alex. Tell us who you are, what you do, and maybe a quick blurb about, what you think has changed the most about modern work in the last few years.
Hi, Yoli. My name is Alex Osipov. I'm the CTO over at 33. I've been here many, many years. So I've held many hats, everything from engineering to security to data center operations and a little bit of product too. So been around. The biggest change is the pace, in my opinion, in terms of what's going on for tech and people in general. I think COVID changed a lot of things, but people on the front lines and what we're doing, what we're going to talk about.
Yeah,
it's moving faster than it ever moved. It's continuous; it doesn't stop, and it's incredibly hard to keep up. And there's a lot of trends kind of coming together around, not enough talent in the industry to actually deal with this deluge. There's too much information. There's more hacks than ever. They're more severe than ever. And it's just a lot, right? The modern world is a busy place and it's a tough place.
Yeah. Aron, welcome to the show. Tell us
Thank
who you
Yoli.
are and what you do. What's changed for you, do you think, in the last few years?
Sure. My name's Aron Derstine. I'm Vice President of Customer Success, and I deal primarily with regulated customers and also with partners. But mostly we're interacting with the consumer side of technology and to kind of get into what we see as far as the modern work or changing in modern work. Definitely agree with what Alex said. The pace is unbelievable. What I see with customers is that they're trying to run their businesses and they are focused on what they're doing as far as what their organization does. And they need technology to work for them. They interact with technology, but they are very much at the mercy of their providers to help them do it safely and navigate very complex situations like Printnightmare. So there's definitely a lot of movement toward SaaS-based programs. People are using the internet more and more. It's easy to sign up and take on new applications and resources just by a click of the button. And that just makes the challenge of managing security and protecting data even more of an issue for these businesses. So we're definitely working to help in providing a centralized platform for that. But we'll talk more a little bit about that as we get more into the details today.
Welcome, Aron. And Justin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Yoli. Thank you for having us. My name is Justin Kapahi. I'm a Vice President of Sales Engineering at OS33. I've been primarily responsible for the partner program the last few years, and I primarily interact with partners. So whereas Aron is mostly dealing with our direct customers and end users, I'm talking to MSPs who are kind of in between us and customers. And it's definitely a much different perspective. As far as your question, I think clearly I agree with both Alex and Aron. I mean, there's been a huge evolution, especially driven by COVID, on the amount of devices we're seeing, locations where people are working, where the applications live, demands of users. But that's all definitely rapidly changing. But also, I think as far as our MSPs are concerned, I think there's been a real change in what the core job of an MSP even is today, right? If you ask even some of our, I'll call them legacy MSPs that we have today, they would tell you that their job is to make sure that the customers are productive and they can work and they can print and they can get their jobs done. But our more modern MSPs, I think even us here, I would tell you that our primary job is to protect our customers' data and make sure that they're not put out of business by a breach. Right. And I think that those two items can conflict. And we saw that here quite a bit. Right. And I think that's where there needs to be a modernization, both from the tech stack and also from the point of view of what our jobs actually are. Right. And I think that that's where we saw a lot of that here.
Yeah. Well, Justin, I first became aware of the Printnightmare when I think you slacked me, and basically, you sounded exhausted and excited at the same time. I'm actually going to read your Slack.
Oh.
Basically said, this week is going to turn out to be one of the best stories we've ever had. No partner has a security team like we have. Being able to lean on us for this stuff is a huge value that can't be understated. We proved that the patch didn't work before they did. This is speaking of Microsoft. No MSP can do this. This is what you gain from being our partner. This is so amazing. I couldn't be more proud of the team. And I was like, whoa, what is going on? Obviously you've been dealing with something significant. And then I joined the Slack where the whole team was handling the investigation of the incident and the communication of it. And it was like a war room, all hands on deck, cross team that straddled every department, engineering, sales, customer service. And I realized we were really dealing with something significant. So tell me, Justin, how did you first become aware that something was going on and of the Printnightmare?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of this happened in the middle of the night, our time, right? So it was a lot of our overnight team was dealing with this from a technical basis and putting in the controls to protect our customers. I was sleeping. So I had noticed at about 6 a.m. that my phone was just vibrating so much that it fell off the table. So I sort of got out of bed and kind of picked up the phone and realized that oh my God, what's going on here? And I read my emails, I look at, I'm seeing Twitter feeds, I'm listening to voicemails, and I'm a bunch of partners, screaming at me that you've turned off printing and you're putting our customers out of business. So clearly I had to figure out what is going on here. So there were some calls going on, I hopped on them and I realized this is really major. And of course there was already a flurry of what I would call fake news, that there were workarounds and these partners were on the phone accusing us of, being too strict and not implementing the workarounds, and we're pissed. We were very mad. And it was hard. Spent a lot of time calming them down, letting them know we're going to figure out what's going on here. We're doing the best we can, but clearly it's very major. And we did what we did because, we thought it was the right thing, and it was.
Right. So they were contacting you because they thought you had turned off printing. Aron, you must have had a similar experience. When did you first become aware that something was going on?
Aron doesn't sleep, you should know.
Well, it's still
It's gonna be a different story.
I rested my eyes for a little bit, and then very early in the morning saw the feed. But the overnight, this was kind of unique. Our security teams always have their eyes on what's happening, and there's lots of different ways that they're gathering that. But they had already picked up on this exploit that had been accidentally published, and that's kind of the interesting part about the whole thing was
right.
A lot of these there are companies that are working to find bugs, and then you kind of securely transfer those to the vendors. You give the vendors time to address those bugs. They release a patch. That's normal.
Right.
Accidentally, the way to circumvent some of these in-place tools like the spooler, the print spooler, was released on the internet. And once it was released, it was out there for everyone. They had the keys to the kingdom. They could follow a path, and they could potentially breach customer data. So, it took a while. The teams had already been digesting this, and we had experts that had been able to sandbox and prove that it was true. And they were also able to follow the workarounds and prove that they were insufficient and did not close the security hole. So it took Justin and I time to digest what had happened, and we were quickly helping customers understand where we stood. But a big part of what I had to do for the next week was combat the information that was, that was out there that suggested that there was a safe alternative, which we knew wasn't. And ultimately, it did come out that those workarounds were not sufficient. So
Right.
there was a lot of catch up for us initially.
So I want to hear a little bit more about that. But before we do that, Alex, can you explain what the Printnightmare exploit was? Like, what is it? Whose tech caused the vulnerability? What is the challenge that it represents for organizations?
Yeah, I mean, so like Aron said, this was a 0 day, meaning there's no fix for it. It was weaponized very quickly, but essentially, if you could run anything on a computer, or if you could do anything on a computer, you could take over that entire machine. So if you clicked on a link specifically crafted, it was a really easy way to get full machine access and take over anything on that machine and keystroke, the whole shebang. It was incredibly severe because it applied to every version of Windows, right? And they talk about 1 billion devices. This was 1 billion vulnerable devices, no workarounds. Everybody uses printing. This wasn't like an isolated, hey, there's some special software that only a couple of people use. And it was so easy because it got weaponized into very easy tools for hackers to use, I think within hours, right?
So it was
so after the leak,
Microsoft's technology, was it the operating system? Was it just the print? Like, what aspect of their tech was?
It's the subsystem for printing.
Okay.
Or reporting, as we found out, right? There was a lot of nuance, people think it's printing, but a lot of customers, and Aron and Justin could talk about this, couldn't open reports. Some customers couldn't bill. I mean, doctors' offices can't print receipts, that kind of stuff. It's really incredible. And timing-wise, I think it was around the end of the month at this time.
Yeah.
So you got a lot of invoices going out and that kind of stuff. So I think one of the worst things, probably not the worst that we've seen. And I think what's unique about this thing is that it was, there's no workaround, and the only way to stay safe was to disable printing. Right. So it wasn't, a lot of times we'll get vulnerabilities that are pretty bad or as bad as this, but you have a workaround, so you roll it out overnight. By the time your users come, or your antivirus vendor can protect against it, and within a couple of hours or maybe a day or two, you're protected. In this case, there was nothing. So it just kind of snowballed over a couple of days. The deafening silence from Microsoft didn't help. It took them days to really acknowledge what pretty much everybody knew.
Yeah.
So it was a unique, midsummer fun night.
It sounds like there was a bit of a process in trying to decide to sort of diagnose the problem, and then deciding what we were going to do on behalf of our customers, and then how we were going to inform them. So can you kind of take us through, maybe Aron or Alex or even Justin, because you guys had to speak to customers, but what was the process you went through to sort of deciding what the problem was, and then what we were going to do on behalf of our customers, and what was the ultimate recommendation we made to our customers?
So late afternoon, I'm not going to say exact times, late afternoon, we learned about it. Right at the end of the day, as you would hope, something like this would drop right before you go home. I want to say around 4 o'clock-ish, the news dropped. The security team pretty much saw it on social media quickly. There's circles that you follow that know, and that information spreads pretty quickly. So we got that exploit fairly quickly. And then, people were scrambling, how do we work around it? right? There's no advice yet. You just have an exploit that says you can take over any machine in the world pretty much.
Yeah.
And so everybody's trying to scramble, talking on social media. How do you work around? There's got to be a way to turn like this thing off or give me something. That continued for probably 2 hours. All the antivirus malware vendors got engaged. Nobody has a solution. Microsoft tickets, nobody has a solution. And then, it comes in. What do we do? I think, around 11 o'clock, we had got everybody together and made the call that we're going to turn it off for now. Right? We didn't know what was going to happen next day, but hey, we're not taking this risk on. It's just our customers do not, want printing that bad that they're going to lose their entire business over it.
Right.
And we'll see, in a couple of hours, this will be all over. And, we see it all the time. In reality, that workflow is pretty common for a security or an IT team. And then more time passed and nothing happened. More time passed and worse exploits came out that could take over any machine. And, they kept getting craftier and craftier of how they could take them over. And still no workouts. Some workarounds came, I think the following day, maybe. All of those kind of proved to be false, and you had to test them. I think in one case, we had a competitor, Aron, we could probably tell the story, call in and tell one of our customers, your IT team doesn't know what they're talking about, type of thing.
How'd you deal with that, Aron? Like, how do you deal with and Justin, like you're saying this is what we're recommending, or in fact, we're turning off your printing. What was the reaction from the customers? Like, what were they like? You're turning off printing. For some of them, this is like a critical business process. Part of, I think you mentioned billing. What were the reactions of customers?
It was super challenging, but let me kind of step back. As Alex was describing in our incident response, this was one of the easier ones, I think, to make the call that what to do. The scope was 1 billion systems. The impact was every one of those systems could be breached. The payload was already out there. It was already weaponized. It was really, since nothing came out, and that was an easy call, and it's done by rating, and like it was a no-brainer. Yeah. The initial, as we're explaining to customers, we had the benefit that I could see in the Slack channels where I was seeing examples of our team sandboxing workarounds that were blowing this thing up. They were taking over machines. So it was easier for me to be equipped to talk to our customers that this is a real thing. This is the risk. It could take your data. It could take anything. And that's why we took the only safe step. And even in the face of competitors telling our customers that, what are you talking about? The workarounds published on this site over here. I already had seen with my own eyes that our teams had sandboxed the workaround, and that it was going to be debunked very, very shortly. So it helped, but the calls were still there. The customers were very frustrated, and that was our role, was really to help help them understand what was really happening and what the real risks were, and why we knew that. And it was helpful to have the experts that backed us up.
And Justin, you're trying to help MSPs, communicate to their customers. So you kind of have this, I'm sure that was a bit of a challenge too, because the MSP leaders or IT leaders are probably looking online as well themselves to find a solution. What was that like?
Yeah, it was. It started off. It just depends on who the partner was. We have different relationships and different levels of trust with some of our partners. I would say some of them were mad. They came at us with, I have a doctor's office and they can't print prescriptions. People are going to die. I suppose they could write a prescription, but they didn't think of that. But it was stuff like that. Like they can't write paychecks. People aren't getting paid. They're in the logging industry and they can't send logs. It was just a bunch of, and then coming out saying, well, this customer called and their other clients can print. Why are you not allowing printing? right? They said, this company says that there's a workaround. You can make this change and it will fix the problem. The good news was that, as Aron mentioned, that we have a very comprehensive security team here. And it's also what we do. So we have these channels that we subscribe to with internally, and it was all outlined very detailed for anyone who's technical to understand that, like, these are the lines of code in this exploit. If you change this to that, then you can then get around this workaround. We kept repeating, the only real solution was to turn the print spooler off, no matter what it said on the internet. And it was nice because that's what I kind of emailed you. It was like, the workaround would be something that would not work. The public would believe that it worked. We would tell them that it wouldn't, and they'd be mad. And then the public would say, wait a second, you were right. And this just kept repeatedly happening day after day for almost a week. I mean, even Microsoft themselves released a patch that we determined quickly did not work. We applied it anyway. But having said that, it's very difficult to go against Microsoft. But you start to see that the public sentiment was the same. You go to the trusted Twitter feeds, trusted security people, and they were in agreement.
Yeah.
The fact that it got to the point where the partners, like, the whole attitude just changed over the course of that week. It became like, thank you. Like, we didn't know, like, how do we apply this to our own systems? So thank you. Like, what do you think about this? How do we deal with that? Right. And then, of course, Alex will get into the fact that there was another major breach that week that further compounded all of this. But I think that's when it occurred to me that our value isn't just our software. It isn't just, our services or our hosting or anything like that. It really was these partners we have, they are small lifestyle businesses. They are not equipped with the kind of security team that we have. And by being our partner, they could lean on us for this kind of advanced, resource that they normally wouldn't have. And I think that as that came to light, you started to hear that it was like a complete 180 on the sentiment. There were still some partners that were completely irate and didn't like it, and we'll have to deal with them later. I'm just kidding, but we have to talk through it and understand that, like, we did what we knew to be right, and like I said, our job is to protect and to make sure that they're not put out of business, and that we also have to realize that when you take control of a system like this without any kind of marker, how do you recover from it? It's like a complete rebuild. It's like weeks, months, right? You would be down it wouldn't be just printing for a week. You'd be just not working for 2 months. And will you still be in business when that's over? And I think when people realize, no one really realizes these consequences until it happens to them. That's the problem. Well, whatever happened to me? Who's coming after me? Why would someone look at me? Well, there's robots looking for you.
Yeah, you don't want to be that one. Alex, it's the social media information cycle seems so rapid, and it seems pretty incredible that even Microsoft sort of got the workaround wrong. What do you think that companies like Microsoft or even the community can do better when incidents like these happen? Like, was this a very sort of unique situation, or is there, when you think about the information cycle, is there things we could do better, like as a community?
I think vendors can take charge. We've seen that in other incidents where one single security team vendor kind of aggregates the source of truth, if you will. Mm-hmm. I think in the Printnightmare case, I think there was a securities team vendor that kept pushing these workarounds because it got them probably customers or eyeballs that were not 100% valid.
That was almost a disservice, though, right?
Yeah, but it got some eyeballs, I'm sure. So there's got to be some distributed way for organizations and security teams, especially. And there's organizations like FSI, ISAC, and where private threat feeds are shared, and I think security teams especially are plugged into each other. And they do share informally, but there's no good, reason to share. If you look at the SolarWinds incident and the hearings in Congress, really mandating companies to share information faster with no repercussions, because in Printnightmare was different, but in a lot of cases people don't share them for legal ramification reasons.
Yeah, they don't want to be held accountable or
exactly. So you have this great knowledge of how to basically prevent something that something really bad from happening to a lot of people, but a lot of times it's in pockets of private conversations, and there's no great way. Social media changes that, but you know, like Justin said, you have to know, who to follow, where to be, have to be in the conversations. They are happening 24/7. Honestly, I think the vendors have to step up. In this case, Microsoft really should be looking at, they're talking a lot about SolarWinds, rightfully so, but they have other incidents that they should be looking at and looking how to do better.
Yeah.
I think it lies mainly with the vendors today, and I think Congress has to do its part too.
It sounded like we had some criteria that sort of helped make that decision for us. It was like, we got to protect the data. In the absence of a solution, we are gonna decide to just turn off the printing. What surprised you the most technically about the compromise, about the Printnightmare compromise? Was it just how easy it was, or like technically, what surprised you the most about it?
Probably the weaponization. A lot of times you'll have theoretical exploits get published, but not exploit, theoretical vulnerabilities, but no exploit. And it takes a while to get to an exploit, right? So,
Got it. Yeah.
And a lot of times people aren't publishing those. In these cases, it was such a clear-cut thing that was wrong. Everybody knew the weapon would get built right away. It's like, the cat's out of the bag type of thing. So we might as well build one because everybody else can build one. And so they built it. And then everybody could copy it incredibly fast. And there was new builds coming out every like 20 minutes, right? So you had to be trying new versions of the weapon, quote unquote, and seeing, hey, do your defenses work against it? And a lot of time, all the times, at least for the first week or so, most of your defenses weren't keeping up with it. So I think that's rapid cycle kind of went a little too fast, together with Microsoft's deafening, they just did not engage for a while. I mean, it took them, I think, 3 days to even acknowledge it. I mean, so much had happened in 3 days that it was like, what's going on? Like, you got to wonder. So
why do you think they took so long? You think it's just a big company, or was it just because it seemed like people identified the problem pretty quickly?
There's two parts of it. There's acknowledging there's a problem, and their security response team is historically incredibly good at that.
Right.
And they didn't acknowledge it, right? We always, in tech engineering world, it takes time to build a solution sometimes, right? And everybody gets that. That's why usually there's responsible disclosure, where you tell the vendor and you give them time to fix it. In this case, they didn't even acknowledge it. I truly don't know. I think there was a process breakdown or vacations or some abnormal event that must have occurred to not acknowledge the thing that, every one of their customers was screaming about, right?
Yeah.
That didn't take much of an effort. It's a webpage they publish and say, hey, we're looking at it. But they didn't even say that. People were, pinging them on Twitter. They're posting posts about something else. They're not responding. And it was just incredibly frustrating. I think there was a major breakdown. I'm sure they're looking at.
Probably maybe just as from a layperson's standpoint, the fact that it was just sort of the printing functionality, and the scope of that. When you think about, I think, Justin, you mentioned, I don't know how many billion devices. I mean, maybe it was just the huge scope of it, But where do we currently stand with the Printnightmare? Was there a patch that fixed it, or where do we stand with it?
It's there are defenses, let's say, that protect against majority of the weapons that are out there. But it's a fragile situation. They have these generations of print drivers and vendors that are not incentivized to improve them, right? If you are, HP makes a lot of printers and they sold them 10 years ago, or Xerox or Fujitsu or one of these off brands that you've never heard of. There's really no incentive for them to improve and secure the print drivers from 10 years ago.
Right.
And so they're still out there. Customers don't want to upgrade their printers, which can cost tens of thousands of dollars. A lot of them aren't even in the office right now. So we're kind of in a stalemate where the industry knows where to go. But we're going to be in this, hey, we got to defend against it situation. But the good thing is we have tools now to defend against this type of thing. I'm sure we'll see variations on it, right? Because it's a fragile system. There'll be more, Printnightmare 2 and 3 and 4 probably at some point, but they'll be less severe. I think maybe like, in the world we live in, it's like the variants of COVID. We'll be more prepared for new types, but the whole system is still pretty fragile, I would say. And I think it's going to take a couple of years at least to get to the other side where we're going to say, hey, printing is secure now on Windows as an industry, right? I think they have solutions, but majority of small businesses are not adopting them. Even large enterprises are still figuring it out. So it's gonna be a journey.
Alex, do you think that there was something about, the vulnerability itself, they published it back in 2020, right? It was out there for a while. And I think there's I'm just guessing. I think there's a level of embarrassment, right? And a level of, this is the printer subsystem for lots of reasons is old, right? Compatibility, old applications, it clearly needs to be gutted and rebuilt, with the new tech landscape in mind, if you will, right? And I think that it's clear that if you look at some of just go into the operating system and look at, the permissions that things have, there are a lot of old objects that existed a long time ago in Windows that are still there. I'm sure it's for compatibility reasons, but I think there's sentiment that there's old stuff in new operating systems that they need to address. And I think there's something has to happen along.
Oh yeah, every version of Windows 11 included, just adds more stuff. That stuff doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
That was there 10 years ago. They've gotten better at, separating it out when times, but a lot, something like printing, people aren't throwing out their 10-year-old printer in the office. And those print drivers are 10 years old in a lot of cases. So what are you going to do? I think as an industry, people have to move forwards. A lot of those printers, let's be honest, are incredibly vulnerable themselves. You can hack the printers, and we read about that too, right? How they hack the same machine over and over again because they're in the printer. So I think the printer industry needs to work on it. But I think it's going to take time to play out, even if they care about it. It looks like Microsoft's problem. The truth is the drivers, Microsoft would have long removed those drivers and those capabilities if the printing industry moved ahead, but they're not moving.
Well, maybe this would be a bit of a wake-up call for the printing industry.
The point, right, is that if the other vendors don't work together to make these improvements, there will always be gaps in the security. Right. And that's what I think why they have these hearings. Like, why don't you work together? Why aren't you figuring this out? You have this system that's so open and anyone can work with it. Maybe that's not the right approach anymore. We have to be more careful because we're running our lives on these computers. It isn't just a hobby or a work tool. Our entire lives are running on these things now. And these kind of breaches take such a huge look. Just shutting down printing. Look what people thought it was doing to their businesses. Imagine if
the impact of the business significantly.
Yeah.
Alex, you guys have invented some technology that may not fix the printing vulnerability, but our philosophy is to protect the data. Can you talk a little bit about local zone and in a situation where there is a breach, how are we thinking about protecting the data? Maybe talk a little bit about local zone.
Yeah, so when you pick up the paper in the last couple of years and you read about these breaches, what you don't typically read is majority of those people had some sort of antivirus, had a whole bunch of security defenses that quite frankly didn't work, and they usually don't. They don't work for the first few days, maybe a month, and then they get better. So we've kind of been designing our product around this idea that your security tools aren't actually going to protect you in that critical part of that, that first response, the first few weeks, if you will. And a lot of the hacks we look at and we talk about are those. It's incredibly easy to write a virus. It's incredibly easy to write a malware. So what do you do about that? You create something we've called local zone. It's a perimeter around the data, right? We are trying to protect your work information and your business world. So in the case of Printnightmare, if your machine got taken over, we're not trying to protect your machine. We're trying to protect your work data, whether that's your email, your Slack, and your private messages. It could be your applications, your passwords, your keystrokes. All of that information needs to be protected. And so we've taken that job on, and technology kind of does it in two ways. One is, what can I do on Yoli's machine, right? What can I do on your computer in case you got hacked by the next thing? It's not Printnightmare, it's Printnightmare V2.
Right.
I'll patent it today. It's coming. It's coming. So what happens in that world? A local zone would have protected your data. As soon as anything tried to access your work information, we would have stopped it. And then the other part is really your passwords getting stolen, things like that. How do you protect your applications that are not on your computer, but something like a Dropbox or your email? So how do you protect that? You could put some systems in place that make sure those applications are not accessible, right? So people can't actually try to get into them. So it's that combination of the local protection, and so you can't get data out, and protecting SaaS applications and applications on the back end. It's incredibly interesting times. And I think we have to spend a lot more time protecting the data, I believe, than we do. We spend a lot more time today, patching and cyber hygiene, incredibly important. But we also need a way to protect the data, because we know all that stuff just is not enough. So, yeah.
Sounds like the local zone can be that sort of third layer of protection. So thanks, guys. This was super, super interesting. I remember when I first, heard about this, I heard some of you guys sort of allude to the fact that that it being called Printnightmare was not necessarily appropriate. What would you call it?
Who said it's not appropriate? We were having nightmares for days. It's exactly. I couldn't say, literally. It was up all night looking at printers and drivers. I was having nightmares.
Nightmare.
Yeah. Nightmare.
For the tech teams, it was definitely a nightmare. I'm sure. Yeah, for Aaron.
Well, I guess it was an appropriate name. I want to say thank you to our guests, Justin Kapahi, Aron, Derstine, and Alex Osipov. Thanks so much for sharing your insights and the experience with the Printnightmare. And hopefully we'll have you come back on the show, because I'm sure there's going to be more incidents to deal with. Thanks for being on, guys.
Thank you.
And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in to the show Work Plus Life. We'd love to hear from you. So comment, like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you on the next show.